Welcome to the Grid Mod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Cook, your host of the Grid Mod Pod and Vice President of Technical Strategy at AEIC. On today's episode, I discuss what it takes to move grid modernization forward from inside the utility with Ahmed Mousa, who's a utility leader, educator, and seasoned expert with experience spanning field operations, transmission and distribution planning, control center, and of course the academia, which is teaching at Rutgers and Columbia University. So in this episode, you'll hear why mindset and organizational structure can be a bigger barrier than technology itself, what distributed energy resources mean for the future utility operations and grid coordination, and really how leaders can champion change, strengthen peer learning, what AEIC is all about, and help build a more resilient utility workforce. We hope you walk away from this with insight and momentum needed to spark change in our industry. So thank you for jumping on and sharing your journey with us.
It's my pleasure, and thanks for the invite. I'm a big fan of the podcast, and I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Ahmed Mousa. I've been in the utility business for 21 years, give or take. I have worked for 4 utilities so far. I started in the field, subcontractor for Pepco in DC. I worked for First Energy a bit, around 8 years in Con Ed, and over 10 years at PSENG. And while doing that, I started teaching. That's something I really enjoy, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. Kind of the education sector has a very, very important role. So I serve also as an adjunct professor. I started at NJIT over 10 years ago, and then I'm teaching a sustainability course at Rutgers, and I taught my first power system course at Columbia. I'm a big fan of the energy system and looking forward really for the future.
Love it. So I believe framing is important because, the future grid is not just a destination. It is a journey. And many of us are already on it. So here we are. So let's just unpack that a bit. When you think about the future grid, what does that really mean from your perspective and your background and kind of championing through the career that you had? And it really beyond technology and infrastructure, but you also can lean into that as well. So
Sure. No, I mean, it's a great question. And I think the biggest step, or I would say the obstacle is, changing the way we think. In my opinion, that is the biggest obstacle for the future. It's not the budget. Of course, it helps to have funding. It's not technology. The market is doing an amazing job. We have to think differently. So I like to think that, part of what I do is I've been to the future and I came back and there's a really need to change. And I think throughout the utility, every sector is very critical. I've been very fortunate to have worked pretty much everywhere. I started from the field. I did design, field work. I had amazing mentorship when I was in Con Ed. I really worked directly and indirectly for legends in New York City. So I learned a lot. And my last job at Con Ed was in the Energy Control Center. I think that was one of the coolest job I ever had. And to answer your question, that's very important because it's one thing to plan for the future, which I've been doing through my role at the planning group, and actually to operate the system. So, we talk about, there's a lot of buzzwords, renewables, solar storage, and now with AI and more to come is how do you prepare the grid for the future? The one thing that we are fortunate, I'm very fortunate, is that the utility is kind of this unspoken language, really. We have this kind of connection, like once you meet a person from the utility, whether national or international, you really click and you share a lot of thoughts. You share, sadness, pain, sweat, substation fires and stuff like that. So there's a lot of lesson to learn. Our work is impacted a lot by the political environment as well, and by climate change, whether you believe in climate change or not. Like, I'm here to address the resiliency aspect of it. From this, from the grid mod perspective, I got involved maybe in 2008 with Smart Grid, part of President Obama's stimulus. So that was I guess that was my first step as a kind of a young engineer to get involved. And I'm not really a big fan of the word smart because it's very relative, really, right? Smart compared to what? If you have two kids and wives.
And we've learned grid modernization is just an evolution of smart grid didn't really hook. So, but in essence, it's the fundamental same drivers and needs, right? Full situational awareness, full grid. But anyway, go ahead. But smart implies that it was dumb and that, did not resonate with, the true utility voices at the time. So we had to, pivot. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great move because, smart is kind of tied to a certain IQ. After a while, you got to get smarter. So I think the grid modernization is the best place to be. I think also some of the biggest changes, to answer your question, is, the thin line between transmission and distribution is kind of disappearing. So you no longer have to, there's two islands, T guys do T things and D guys do D things, a lot of renewables are impacting, solar is impacting distribution, that backfeed to transmission. Sometimes a lot of, wind and solar would impact distribution. I think right now is, in my opinion, the best time really to be in the business. I'm a big fan of big changes. Like, we're going to talk about FERC Order 22 a bit. And I don't want to get involved with the regulation, but I think, in my opinion, that's the best test for the grid. Let's see if you're really ready for the 100% clean and renewable energy. In my opinion, 2022 is the best bet. Are we able really to run a system that relies on your house and my building and his building and this business and his car or not? So the good news is that we're coming very close to the deadline. So I'm very optimistic.
I love it. An optimistic voice around FERC Order 2222. Well, just for our listeners, is FERC an acronym that we have to spell?
Yes. So this is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. It's in my own terms, like a simple, a very powerful entity from the government that would set rules and enforce rules. So 2222, in a very simple term, it's in the near future, could be as early as 2028 or sooner. It's the ability for customers' equipment, customers' home, and businesses to participate. So imagine your house, your solar installation, your energy storage, your electric vehicle, and you're able now to, in a way, compete with like a natural gas plant. So you're no longer just, paying the bill, you're getting paid, and you're a very important part of it. I live in New York City, and not the best when it comes to weather. So what happens when a cloud comes in? Really, we have a lot of cloud comes in. So that's kind of like that's what I mentioned is the biggest test for the system. Rainy days, cloudy days, fast moving clouds. How do we still meet the entity, the grid, which is the most important machine nowadays?
And just for also perspective, FERC Order 2222, was released in 2020, 2021, and it was really a written document that was created by a set of minds that had an idea that got elevated to a level that created a lot of, no pun intended, inertia to really drive people to think differently, which kind of full circle to what you said at the beginning. And so when you look at the pockets of the grid here across the states, the reality has became real, such as in Texas. They're delivering systems and programs and the capability to bid behind the meter customer equipment into the 15-minute energy market, which is really complex in itself to understand what's happening in Texas versus what's happening in New York versus what's happening in other grids. But what I think the beauty of the grid mod, and if we can weave kind of what the strong signal is, you must, as a utility, have full situational awareness of all assets so that you can pivot and create and drive new, novel ways of thinking differently to then unlock all that we all talk about, right? And so you're right, like FERC Order 2222 is a game changer because it fundamentally has just made a large amount of us, utility folk, to really ask some very important questions. So I love it. And you are a rare optimistic FERC Order 2222. I love it. We should make this whole episode about that. But let's move on to the other one. So, there's a balance, right, between, and I love how you said it, and I think that we probably reached this in our own career, okay, well, you need funding. Okay. And then you work really hard and you actually convince the right amount of people, and it could be people you never knew how to be engaged, to give you the funding to do a particular project or program to prove out a phenomena that we're all talking about. But, you as an individual entity have to do it your own self because you have your hierarchy of people. And then you can even say that you have the people. So you have your own self and a whiz-bang set of maybe consultants and or internal folk, and you're driving it, and you still find yourself, right? From a practicality and a vision, there's like a gap. So, from your journey, and maybe there's a particular project or maybe not, but like, what have you learned about that whole phenomena? Like, yeah, we got the funding, we got the people, but then who are the people? So like really maybe talk through maybe the people, the processes, and ultimately the culture that you found yourself working through in this grid modernization space.
Yeah, no, it's just a great question. So in the past, I have worked in transmission only, distribution only, and I managed both. And there are a lot of very interesting and very powerful tools in the transmission business and others in distribution, especially in the transmission, like, a lot of fax acting devices, electronics and stuff like that. I've been very keen on finding a way to install this device in the distribution system. the grid mod of the distribution system, if you want. So going back to the engineering, the politics, which is something I really enjoy. So the state wanted an unrestricted system for renewables. That's what the state wanted. That basically means everybody's more than welcome to connect, you know, kind of I call it the outlaw grid, let them all connect. So I was trying to find means such that when this becomes effective, it should not be a problem. So there is a fast acting device known as a static compensator, StatCom, that is kind of common to in large transmission substation. Then I found out that one vendor actually makes this product for the distribution system. So I was really to go back to your question. So I knew there's a product. I knew this product is very superior. I knew the state want a lot of solar. So what's really missing was to bridge the gap. Okay, solar causes a problem with the voltage, especially when you have a lot of cloud movement. Here's a device that could fix it, but it's new. It's a transmission style, never been tested in distribution. So that was really my thesis, if you will. To go back to your question, so the problem is new device, different kind of system distribution. So I had to go through the route, from engineering, standards, communication. IT was was a great support, and others, cybersecurity. So like I said, if you want to have a new tool, you really have to be willing to go all in, because in the beginning, you don't get that many supporters. It's the opposite, actually. So I was very fortunate at the end to work with great teams across different groups, from renewables, from IT, asset management, engineering. The vendor was an amazing support. We even had a consultant. We did an IEEE paper. So we kind of checked all the boxes. That was very important for me to kind of show something that if you really, really believe in a device, go all in. And that's what I mentioned earlier about the issue. It's not really going to be technology. Technology is always improving. Budgets, they kind of come and go. But the hardest is, the struggle of to go. So that's really what I did.
Right. I mean, a big part of all of this is just the human essence of, change is not something, we are built to just stay alive. So like any type of change, even for the good, it shows up as uncertainty. So like, I like to always, I do it often. If you think about this machine that has evolved over 140 years through the complexity of it, there's a lot of analogies around the neural network and then the control center of the brain and then the muscles or the assets. So like in itself, it's set in its ways. So like, and then utilities, uncertainty is seen as a risk. So we're very risk adverse, that we say that a lot. And when we say we, it's the individual people that make up the hierarchy of leadership, which then, ultimately oversee and or empower the individuals that kind of understand the granular necessities of anything that's changing. And so, for instance, what you're sharing is like, oh, here comes these solar panels. It's an inverter-based resources. It's connecting to a grid. It's going to start seeing a flow of electrons that has never been designed for. And so all of the upstream systems are going to need to be coordinated. And there's this fundamental gap around ensuring that your voltage stays strong signal, stays healthy and within regulatory means. And so to the person that knows, it's such an obvious, like, well, we need this piece of asset, but that asset costs money. You don't have the personnel inside internally to truly understand it. It might be you, but then you have to convince like the design, the procurement, the asset management overseers, the implementers, the integrators, and then the overall operators. So, so there's this whole fleet of your passion and drive. So when you say go all in, like you truly have to believe that this is the correct solution. And so, positive intent, it's not personal, which you did mention, but like it does start to feel personal. So the protection of the system to be changed is, resistance, skepticism, there's critique, people withdraw, people leave companies. And then there's just a general idea like, well, it'll never work here because like you're individuals. And so, you've been in it, right? And you felt it. And so like to be able to like show up again and again for all of the varying changes is quite, a daunting, oversee, especially when you know what's going to happen. It's like, oh, let's straddle up and try to advance an advanced distribution management system, which is, a full fleet of technologies and changes in organization. So I guess you can have the best plan with all of the money allocated. You can have your leadership oversight. You can have the regulators say even making you go do. So you can have a project plan, but really there's a lot of lessons that you will learn when you're championing through these obstacles. So I guess, what were some of, maybe particular that project you share or a new project? What have you noticed now that you've done it a couple times that you didn't know prior that you ensure yourself to do when championing another thread?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And so I spent a lot of years in planning. I like to say, we are very desperate people. We plan for the worst day, the worst hour, the worst event. We have nothing positive in life to look for if you work in planning. So that kind of, sets your character.
Yeah.
That becomes I think that becomes like a very positive thing because, before I or others propose a solution, like I said, you gotta really do. When I said all in, that means there's so much stuff to do before even taking it even to your manager. Forget about taking it all the way up. And then, especially if you're dealing with a vendor, so now now you add more complexity because that's the third party. And those kind of devices, they're very very technical. You mentioned, I guess when we first started, consulting. I personally believe everybody has a place on the table. Consultant, EPCs. I'm a big fan of the education sector. Department of Energy have amazing labs, a lot of resources that are all available. There's not that many takers yet. So I think, the work that you do, like AIEC and the Grid Mod, like I said, we have this kind of, I always say distribution, all of us is kind of like, we're like listening to Bob Marley, One Love, we share everything. We never really hide anything from one another. I mean, transmission may be different, but
Yeah.
distribution, so we kind of work together towards a better goal. So I think the lesson learned is really like you have to have a very strong partnership with whatever vendor. Maybe you learn more about the warranty, the maintenance. So like the non-technical part that people like us engineers may miss, they become very essential. So that's what I learned as well. Like going forward, especially with a new equipment or new idea or like any technology, the non-technical piece of it you mentioned, procurement, warranty. Right now with the supply chain, so I think COVID really taught us a lot as well. So if I
Yeah.
were to replicate something like this, we have a lot of resources to help.
I think, probably a big part of traversing the multiple groups is like we as beings, we are in a space where what we know is what we know. And, I like to say the more we know, the less we know. That's not really something that a lot of people embrace. If anything, they just shut down. They have a very fixed mindset, right? So just realizing all of the groups that you're traversing, you know, it is pause intent, it's not personal. And so like being able to develop communication skills where you don't start with persuading someone to be different or to do something or like adopt a vendor because you did all this homework and now you're bringing it to the person. And so really start with protection. Like, well, what are you fear? What do you think we don't have? Like, right, like there's a whole spew of things that have to like really happen in one of those conversations. And like you mentioned, a bunch of different groups, right? Especially if you're a planner. I mean, you're the one dreaming up these forecasted or potential possibilities. So like, does anyone even believe in your forecast? Or, right? So like everybody can be a planner, right? Everybody wants to be a planner. I that used to be our running joke is like, once, you do the job and you find the solution. I mean, there's an expectation that it was just like one scenario, but now we have the tools. We can run thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of scenarios, and we ultimately need to pick one to move forward to kind of and capture whatever problem we're trying to solve, and that in itself is hard to persuade to multiple audiences. So thinking about how you're out in the community, you're also an educator, and really the worlds that you find your time in. And what have you found utilizing the industry, which you mentioned, the labs, and there's the groups, but like this whole peer-to-peer aspect, how have you found that to be of value as you championed a lot of these changes?
This is like very, very important. The peer-to-peer, in my opinion, it's one of the most important things. Somebody told me this, I forgot who, that for a lot of utilities, if Edison was to come back to life, he could run most utilities globally, no problem. He didn't miss much. That's a problem for me. I mean, you could think this is a good thing. I think this is a terrible thing. Yes, it's good that the system is up and running, but there's a lot more. I like to work a lot with our very, very experienced individuals. And I had the pleasure of reporting to many of them at different companies I've worked for. The knowledge you gain from them cannot be replicated. Once they retire, even if they left you every email they had, it's all on their brain. And I also like to work with the young crowd. And that's what I mentioned, in the teaching, it's amazing. I mean, students really behave different. You have those who are hardcore about books. So they just want to hear about theories they cannot relate. Others who don't want to read about books, give me the practical work. Those are sustainability. And I think which I didn't mention at all today, I'm a huge fan of the startups. I do serve sometime as an advisor or judge, and it's kind of looking very bright that, some of them have this great idea. The missing is kind of what the grid, what's happening. And that goes back to your question about the peer-to-peer. Again, whether it's within the same group, other groups, part of what I do is I have to really talk to pretty much every group you could think about. And you mentioned conferences. That's really the most important thing, IEEE, EPRI, AEIC, and others. That's when you get all these ideas really kind of from just a kind of like a data dump, and then you build from it. So I'm very optimistic. At the same time, I worry. One of the futuristic things is like the workforce of the future. And I'm looking at, the 15 years old, 16 years old, and I start questioning, are we going to have, for example, people that are willing to work in the field? And that was my first job. It's not easy at all to go in manholes, to stay in this freezing weather when it's like 100 degrees. So what's the future? And then, their attachment to their cell phones, how can you focus on cybersecurity? It's a security job. And then at the same time, they find very innovative ways to kind of do the same task. So it's kind of optimism / kind of worry a bit, kind of combined together. But just to finalize your question, I also meet a lot of people that may not be more than willing to sound their opinion kind of in a very large crowd, but they provide great value. So I'm always like listening to everybody else. And like I said, the good news about our business compared to other business is you deal with it every day. You have to pay the rent and you have to pay the electric bill. I'm originally from Egypt, so our relationship with the utility is when a meter reader comes in, you pay the bill. That's kind of the end of it. And if you lose power, you call them. Now it's changing a lot. But I think the user groups, all the work that you're doing and the podcast, I think podcast is one of the most important things right now. You get so much information from others. I've never really met so far an utility personnel who's not willing to share. If I call somebody in California or Texas, they're more than happy to share, discuss. That is something that you're not going to have, for example, in the financial sector. You have this competition, trade secrets, but there's a lot of stuff. I'm a huge fan of benchmarking. And I work with our benchmarking group. It's my favorite group. So that really helps a lot.
Yes, I love it. And that made me think of a mentor from 21 years ago when I was working for a manufacturing Mitsubishi Electric. One of the gentlemen was like, pick up the phone. And I'm like, what? And this is 21 years ago. Pick up the phone and talk to people. And so I think, there is something happening. And this is me being hopeful, is, we can only be sold so much that the access and the availability of this massive amount of information in the palm of our hand, at some point in time, we realize, and I think it's happening in many peer groups, the human connectedness and the reality that the experience and the understandings and lessons learned of just traversing a new path is something that cannot be captured through AI or an Autobot. It truly is that human connected fiber that continues to, I think, thread through, and it's going to become more apparent as, no one's going out there. Maybe there's a robot that will help put up a pole, but to really be able to understand where the poles need to go and how to run the wires, you're going to need people and processes in place to really expedite that or make it more efficient or effective. So I love that. So my last question to you is, if you were speaking directly to others that are walking this same path, really, blazing the conversation within utilities to champion change, what is your simple, piece of guidance or wisdom or encouragement that you would want to offer?
So I think if you're early in your career, my advice, especially when I say early, like your first 10 years, don't waste a minute. Make use of every minute. I was very, very fortunate to have worked for Con Ed, great people. I think I optimized every minute, every weekend, and then again, I did a lot of different tasks at Con Ed. New York City is not the easiest. It's probably the hardest place on earth to do any kind of work. So that kind of really builds your engineering character. They were all very willing to answer any questions that I have. A lot of opportunities. I take great pride, because I live in Queens. I take great pride, when I still drive by some of the substations. Oh yeah, I did work for this station. I did for this one. They're like your babies, if you will, the substation. Work really hard, do your homework. And that goes back to the example I gave. Once you do your homework and when you're very, very technical and sound, it's going to be, it's not like people are evil and they want to deny you. It's just to your point, change is hard, especially in a utility business. So do your homework. If you really believe in something, go all in. The good news right now, like I mentioned, that's why I mentioned kind of benchmarking a lot. And I don't believe you need to stick with your own utility. That's something maybe it's a little bit unique. If you have an idea, and you're not getting that much traction even within your department, go to other utilities in the same state first. If not,
Right.
go other states. If not completely, go overseas. Like I just for fun, I do a lot of work with a lot of utilities, especially in the Middle East. They're very, very keen on innovation. I gotta give them credit. And others, Australia and Europe. So every chance you could learn something. Build your own network. I think we all have network on LinkedIn, but build a network of I'm not gonna say supporters, because you don't always need supporters. You need somebody to critique something. Like I said, planners, we're the best. If you have an idea, you want to see how strong it is, get a planner. He or she will destroy it for you, but that they're really helping you if you want. And then again, make use of all the memberships that are available. I mean, the amount of information you may get in like a 1 hour webinar, that's very, very helpful. But again, your first 10 years, you should not really waste a single minute. That should be the most important. Like really shape your career after that. And one thing is you have to stand your ground. Don't expect, unfortunately, don't expect, flowers and awards. You're in the wrong business. And that kind of, maybe we need to celebrate success a bit more. I think 2025 was a very tough year. So hopefully 2026 will be a better year. So celebrate your own success, work with others, establish, small groups off the record, I had something I used to call it street knowledge. We used to get all the group together, pick up an idea and just discuss something. It doesn't have to be about a specific group we're doing. So just rewire your brain a bit, because after a while it's going to become, just flat. So That's what I would do.
Okay. Well, Ahmed, thank you for bringing your voice and your experience and really just the honesty to this conversation. Grid modernization succeeds or fails based on how well, this is, I guess, what I'm getting from your tip, we engage people, create a shared understanding, and build trust over time. So it can't happen instantly. You have to, care for it. So conversations like this help really, I think, move the industry forward. And to our listeners, I encourage you to think about who the change champions are within your own organizations. Are you one of them? But also, how can you support them, learn from them, and really amplify your voice or their voices, as you're traversing and trying to champion all of this transformational, impactful work that's happening in the grid mod space. So thank you for joining us today. Until next time.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.